It all began on a Saturday morning, the kind where everything feels calm and unhurried. The sun was just starting to peek over the trees, casting soft golden light across Willow Creek's lake. I sat by my window with a steaming cup of coffee, enjoying the quiet. My wildflowers swayed gently in the breeze outside, adding a splash of color to the otherwise predictable rows of houses. For once, life felt peaceful, but peace, as I learned that day, can be fleeting. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable roar of an engine far too loud for our sleepy neighborhood. I turned toward the sound and saw Karen Beasley speeding down the cul-de-sac in her shiny silver SUV. If you've ever met someone who looks like they were born holding a clipboard, that's Karen. She's the self-appointed guardian of Willow Creek's rules, always ready to pounce on anyone daring to step out of line. Her presence alone made me instinctively check if my trash cans were perfectly aligned, or if my mailbox leaned even slightly crooked. Karen screeched to a halt right outside my house, slamming her car door so hard I thought it might shatter. Great, I thought, bracing myself. Here we go again. Sure enough, she marched up my driveway with a determined stride, her heels clicking against the pavement like tiny hammers striking nails into my patience. "Good morning," she chirped, though her tone suggested anything but goodwill. "We need to talk about your situation." I sighed inwardly. This wasn't the first time Karen had shown up uninvited to critique my yard. To her, my wildflowers weren't charming. They were chaos incarnate. They broke some invisible rule she'd invented in her head about what counted as acceptable landscaping. But before I could respond, something strange happened. Instead of focusing solely on my flowers, Karen's sharp eyes darted past me, scanning the rest of the street. Her expression shifted from smug superiority to outright horror. "What is this asterisk?" she demanded, pointing dramatically at the colorful additions scattered throughout the neighborhood. Wind chimes tinkled softly in the distance, fairy lights twinkled from tree houses, and hand-painted rocks dotted front yards like hidden treasures. It was beautiful, or at least, it was to us. To Karen, though, it must have looked like the apocalypse. "This isn't Willow Creek anymore," she declared, her voice rising in pitch. "It's a circus." Without another word, she spun around and stormed back to her car, muttering furiously under her breath. I watched curiously, wondering what she planned to do next. That's when things took a turn no one could have predicted. Ignoring the massive sign warning drivers about the dead end near the lake, Karen gunned her engine and sped off toward the water. At first, I didn't believe what I was seeing. The path leading to the lake is narrow, bumpy, and clearly marked with warnings. Everyone knows it ends abruptly at the edge of the water. Yet there she went, tires kicking up dirt as she charged forward like a bull in a china shop. And then, splash! Her SUV plunged nose first into the lake, its rear wheels sticking straight up in the air like a mechanical turtle flipped onto its shell. For a moment, everything froze. Even the birds seemed to pause mid-flight, unsure how to react to such bizarre spectacle. Then came the muffled sound of Karen yelling from inside her sinking car. "Oh no," I muttered, setting my coffee aside. Part of me wanted to laugh. It was impossible not to feel a twinge of satisfaction watching karma take such a literal form. But another part knew someone needed help. Grabbing a life jacket from my shed, I sprinted toward the scene, hoping this wouldn't escalate further. Little did I know, the real drama was only beginning. The sight of Karen's SUV half-submerged in the lake was surreal, like something out of a slapstick comedy. Water lapped at the sides of the vehicle as it sat there, tilted awkwardly, its rear wheels spinning uselessly in the air. Steam, or maybe smoke, rose from the hood, mingling with the mist hovering over the lake. It was hard to tell whether the car was more embarrassed or Karen herself. I stood frozen for a second, torn between disbelief and concern. Sure, Karen had been nothing but trouble since I moved into Willow Creek, but nobody deserved to be stuck in a sinking car, even if they kind of drove themselves into it. Shaking off my shock, I grabbed the life jacket I'd brought and hurried toward the water's edge. "Karen," I called out, trying to sound calm despite the absurdity of the situation. "Are you okay?" From inside the SUV, I heard muffled yelling. The driver's side window was cracked open just enough for her voice to carry, though not enough to see what she was doing. "What do you think?" She snapped back, her tone dripping with indignation. "Do I look okay?" "Well, no," I replied honestly, glancing at the car teetering precariously in the shallow water. "But you're alive, so that's a start." She didn't appreciate my attempt at humor. Instead, she started fumbling with the door handle, clearly struggling to push it open against the pressure of the water. Her face appeared in the gap between the window and the frame, a mix of panic and fury that somehow managed to make her look even more unhinged than usual. "Help me get out of here," she demanded, her voice rising an octave. "This is all your fault." "My fault? How on earth could this possibly be my fault?" Before I could argue, she interrupted me with another wave of complaints. "If you hadn't encouraged everyone to turn this neighborhood into some kind of anarchist commune, none of this would have happened." I blinked, momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity of her logic. Encouraged? Anarchist commune? What did any of that have to do with her driving straight into a lake? Still, now wasn't the time to debate semantics. She was wet, angry, and potentially in danger, however self-inflicted it might have been. "Just take this," I said firmly, holding up the life jacket. "It'll help keep you afloat while we figure things out." Karen hesitated, eyeing the bright orange flotation device, like it was personally offending her. "I don't need that," she huffed. "I can swim." "Yeah, well, better safe than sorry," I shot back, tossing the jacket onto the roof of the car. "Now grab it, and let's go." Reluctantly, she snatched the life jacket and wriggled partway out of the car, her movements clumsy and exaggerated. Watching her struggle was almost painful, not because I felt bad for her, but because she made everything 10 times harder than it needed to be. Every step seemed calculated to maximize drama, as if she were starring in her own reality TV show instead of dealing with an actual emergency. Finally, after what felt like forever, Karen managed to pull herself free from the wreckage. She waded through the waist-deep water toward shore, clutching the life jacket like it was a prop rather than a tool for survival. Her designer blouse clung to her skin, her perfectly styled hair now plastered against her forehead in soggy strands. If looks could kill, the glare she gave me would have dropped me where I stood. "You're going to pay for this," she muttered darkly, pointing a finger at me like I'd orchestrated the whole thing. "Pay for what?" I asked incredulously. "You're the one who drove into the lake." She ignored me, stomping past and collapsing dramatically onto the grassy bank. For a moment, she simply sat there, dripping water everywhere, muttering under her breath about how unsafe the neighborhood had become. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but notice she still had her phone clutched tightly in one hand, miraculously dry despite everything. "What are you doing?" I asked cautiously, nodding toward the device. "Calling 911, she announced, her voice suddenly firm. "Someone needs to hold you accountable for this mess." Accountable? For what? My mind raced as I tried to process her words. Was she seriously planning to report me for helping her? This woman truly lived in her own universe, one where rules existed only to serve her ego and logic was optional. Before I could protest, Karen dialed the number and lifted the phone to her ear. Whatever she said next would change everything, for both of us. As Karen dialed 911, I felt a mixture of disbelief and frustration bubbling inside me. Here I was, standing ankle-deep in muddy water, having just tried to help her escape a sinking car, and she was calling the authorities on *me*. It was like living in some bizarre alternate reality, where basic human decency didn't exist. "Hello," Karen began, her voice trembling with exaggerated emotion. "Yes, I need assistance. I've been involved in a very serious incident." She paused for effect, then continued. "A reckless homeowner deliberately drove me into their lake." My jaw dropped. "What?" I blurted out, unable to contain myself. That's not what happened. Karen shot me a venomous glare, silencing me mid-protest. Turning her attention back to the phone, she pressed on, clearly determined to paint herself as the victim. They refused to assist properly, leaving me stranded in dangerous conditions. My life was at risk. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. Refused to assist. Was she even listening to herself? I had literally handed her a life jacket and guided her out of the water. If anything, I should have been filing a complaint about her theatrics. The operator on the other end must have asked for clarification because Karen launched into an even more dramatic retelling of events. This person lured me here under false pretenses, she insisted, gesturing wildly toward my house. It's clear they're trying to intimidate me because I enforce neighborhood standards. Lured her. False pretenses. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to stave off a headache. The absurdity of her accusations was almost laughable, if it weren't so infuriating. All I'd done was sit by my window drinking coffee when she decided to take a joyride into the lake. Somehow, though, in Karen's twisted version of reality, I was now public enemy number one. By this point, a small crowd had begun to gather. Neighbors who had heard the commotion wandered over to see what was going on. Mrs. Thompson arrived first, clutching a thermos of tea and wearing an expression that hovered somewhere between concern and amusement. Tom followed close behind, providing a folding chair for anyone who wanted to watch the spectacle unfold. Even Greg and Linda Monroe made an appearance, looking unusually curious instead of judgmental. "What's going on?" Mrs. Thompson asked, raising an eyebrow as she took in the scene. Karen dripping wet on the grass, the half-submerged SUV bobbing gently in the water, and me standing there looking utterly bewildered. Before I could explain, Karen turned her attention to the growing audience. "This is exactly why Willow Creek is falling apart," she declared, pointing accusingly at me. "People think they can do whatever they want without consequences." Her words sparked murmurs among the crowd. Some nodded sympathetically, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Lena, the young mom from down the street, stepped forward with her toddler balanced on her hip. Karen," she said cautiously, "didn't you drive your car into the lake yourself?" Karen ignored her, waving dismissively as if Alina's question wasn't worth acknowledging. Instead, she focused on wrapping up her call with emergency services. "Please send someone immediately," she pleaded, her voice thick with manufactured distress. "This situation is completely out of control." Moments later, the distant wail of sirens echoed through the neighborhood. 2 police cars and an ambulance rolled up to the scene, their flashing lights reflecting off the surface of the lake. Officers climbed out, surveying the chaos with a mix of confusion and professionalism. Paramedics rushed to check on Karen, who instantly leaned into her role as the damsel in distress, clutching her chest and gasping dramatically. Meanwhile, I found myself being pulled aside by one of the officers. "Can you tell us what happened here?" he asked, pen poised over his notepad. I took a deep breath, trying to piece together a coherent explanation. "Well," I started. "She drove her car into the lake. She pushed me in," Karen interjected, cutting me off before I could finish. "She deliberately sabotaged my vehicle." The officer frowned, clearly unsure whom to believe. Just as I opened my mouth to defend myself, something unexpected happened. Greg Monroe, normally one of Karen's biggest supporters, stepped forward. "Actually," he said hesitantly, "we saw her speeding down the cul-de-sac earlier. There's a big sign warning about the dead end. She didn't slow down at all." His admission sent ripples through the group. One by one, other neighbors chimed in, corroborating Greg's account. Even shy Mr. Patel, who rarely spoke during HOA meetings, confirmed the existence of the warning sign. The tide was turning, and Karen knew it. Her face flushed red as she realized her story was unraveling. "You people are insane," she shrieked, throwing her hands up in exasperation. "This isn't over." But it was clear, even the officers believed her version lacked credibility. After issuing her a citation for reckless driving, they packed up and left, leaving Karen fuming on the sidelines. As the crowd dispersed, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of vindication. Karma might not always be immediate, but when it finally arrives, it sure knows how to make an entrance. The aftermath of Karen's failed attempt to paint me as the villain played out like a slow-motion train wreck. As the crowd began to disperse, there was an undeniable shift in the air, a mix of disbelief, amusement, and quiet satisfaction. For months, Karen had ruled Willow Creek with an iron fist, enforcing rules that most of us didn't even know existed until she pointed them out. But now, her carefully constructed image of authority was cracking right before our eyes. Karen stormed off toward her soggy SUV, muttering under her breath about ungrateful neighbors and injustice. She tried to climb back into the driver's seat, presumably to drive herself out of the lake, but the car wasn't having it. The engine sputtered weakly before falling silent altogether. Defeated, she slumped against the hood, looking more like a drowned rat than the polished HOA enforcer we were used to seeing. Mrs. Thompson sidled up next to me, handing over a cup of tea she brought from home. "Well," she said with a wry smile, "that was certainly entertaining." I couldn't argue with that. Watching Karen flail around in the water and then try to twist reality into some kind of conspiracy against her was equal parts infuriating and hilarious. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't entirely over. People like Karen don't give up easily, especially when their pride is on the line. As if reading my mind, Tom chimed in. "She'll be back," he said matter-of-factly, adjusting his glasses. "Mark my words, she won't let this go without making someone pay." His comment sent a ripple of unease through the group. No one doubted that Karen would retaliate in some way. She thrived on drama and control. But for now, at least we had won a small victory. Her reckless actions had exposed her hypocrisy, and the neighborhood was starting to see her for what she truly was, a bully hiding behind a clipboard. Elena shifted her toddler to her other hip and spoke up. "Maybe this is our chance to push back," she suggested, her voice filled with cautious optimism. "If enough of us stand together, maybe we can finally put an end to all these ridiculous rules." Her words sparked a murmur of agreement among the neighbors. For so long, we'd allowed the HOA to dictate every aspect of our lives, from the color of our shutters to the height of our hedges. But today, something felt different. Maybe it was the absurdity of Karen's stunt, or maybe it was the realization that we weren't alone in our frustration. Whatever it was, it gave us courage. Over the next few days, whispers of rebellion spread throughout Willow Creek. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves started chatting across fences, sharing stories of run-ins with Karen and the HOA board. Some admitted they'd been fined for trivial things like planting marigolds instead of petunias, while others confessed they'd been too afraid to speak up until now. Inspired by the growing momentum, I decided to take things a step further. With Mrs. Thompson's help, I drafted a petition calling for reforms within the HOA. We proposed loosening certain restrictions, giving homeowners more freedom to personalize their properties, and holding the board accountable for its decisions. It wasn't a radical plan, but it was a start. When we presented the petition at the next HOA meeting, the room buzzed with nervous energy. Margaret Hensley, the president of the HOA, looked visibly uncomfortable as she scanned the list of signatures. Even Greg and Linda Monroe, who had always been staunch supporters of the status quo, seemed hesitant to defend the board after witnessing Karen's meltdown by the lake. "This is preposterous," Margaret finally declared, slamming the petition onto the table. "We have standards to uphold, and we're asking you to reconsider those standards," I replied calmly, standing my ground. "Willow Creek isn't a showroom. It's a community. Shouldn't that mean something?" The tension in the room was palpable, but so was the sense of solidarity among the residents. One by one, people voiced their support for change, citing examples of how the HOA's rigid policies had stifled creativity and neighborly connections. By the time the meeting ended, it was clear that the tide was turning. Karen sat quietly in the corner, arms crossed and lips pursed, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. She knew she'd lost this round, but her silence spoke volumes. This wasn't the end of her reign. It was just the beginning of ours. And for the first time in a long time, Willow Creek felt alive with possibility. The days following the infamous lake incident felt like a turning point for Willow Creek. The neighborhood buzzed with conversations about what had happened, and Karen's dramatic plunge into the water became the stuff of local legend. People joked about it in hushed tones at the grocery store, and kids even started drawing pictures of her SUV sticking out of the lake, like some kind of modern art installation. But beneath all the humor, something deeper was brewing. A quiet revolution. Karen, unsurprisingly, wasn't taking her public humiliation well. She avoided eye contact whenever she passed me on the street, though I could feel her glare burning holes through my back. Her usual strut had been replaced by a stiff, purposeful march, as if she were trying to reclaim whatever dignity she thought she'd lost. Still, no one missed the fact that her once pristine car now sported a bumper sticker that read ***, honk, if you hate drama ***, a not-so-subtle jab at the rest of us, courtesy of an anonymous prankster. Okay, fine, it was me. But while Karen stewed in silence, the rest of the neighborhood continued to rally around the idea of change. The petition we presented at the HOA meeting gained traction faster than anyone expected. Dozens of signatures poured in overnight, along with handwritten notes detailing personal frustrations with the board's micromanagement. One neighbor wrote about how they'd been fined for painting their front door, a shade of blue deemed too bold. Another shared a story about being scolded for letting their dog bark during thunderstorms. Each account added fuel to the fire, reminding us why this fight mattered. Margaret Hensley, the HOA president, tried to downplay the growing unrest. At first, she dismissed our concerns as mere complaints from a vocal minority. But when more and more residents showed up to meetings, armed with stories, suggestions, and sheer determination, it became impossible for her to ignore the groundswell of dissent. Even Greg and Linda Monroe, who had always been loyal foot soldiers for the HOA, began questioning whether the rules really served the community or just created unnecessary tension. One evening, a group of us gathered at Mrs. Thompson's house to strategize next steps. Her cozy living room quickly filled with neighbors clutching mugs of coffee and notebooks scribbled with ideas. Tom suggested organizing a neighborhood open house where residents could showcase their unique touches, like Alina's fairy lights or his own scarecrow. To prove that individuality didn't ruin property values, it enhanced them. Others proposed hosting workshops on gardening and DIY projects to encourage creativity without breaking any actual laws. It's not just about fighting the HOA, Mrs. Thompson said thoughtfully, stirring sugar into her tea. It's about showing them, and ourselves, that Willow Creek can be both beautiful and diverse. Her words resonated deeply. For too long, we'd let fear dictate how we lived our lives here. Fear of fines, fear of judgment, fear of standing out. But now, inspired by each other's courage, we were ready to embrace something new. Meanwhile, Karen remained oddly quiet, at least publicly. Rumor had it she was lobbying behind the scenes, trying to rally support for stricter enforcement of existing rules. But her efforts fell flat. Neighbors politely declined her invitations to urgent discussions about restoring order, and even Margaret seemed reluctant to engage with her endless emails detailing perceived infractions. Then came the moment none of us saw coming. During a routine inspection of common areas, Karen stumbled upon a small but meaningful act of defiance. Someone had painted a giant mural on the side of the community shed. It depicted a vibrant garden bursting with wildflowers, wind chimes, and even a tiny caricature of Karen sinking into a cartoonish lake. Beneath it, in bold letters, were the words, ***, Willow Creek grows together. ***. At first, Karen erupted in outrage, demanding the artwork be removed immediately. But to everyone's surprise, Margaret hesitated. After consulting with the HOA board, and perhaps sensing the shifting winds, she announced that the mural could stay, at least temporarily. Karen stormed off in a huff, muttering about lawsuits and anarchy. But the rest of us couldn't help but smile. That mural wasn't just paint on wood. It was a symbol of hope, resilience, and unity. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but for the first time, it felt like home. Weeks turned into months, and the changes in Willow Creek became impossible to ignore. The once stifling grip of the HOA began to loosen, like a tightly wound clock finally running out of steam. Margaret Hensley, who had always been the face of authority, seemed to retreat into the background, her clipboard gathering dust as she struggled to keep up with the wave of transformation sweeping through the neighborhood. Fines dwindled, and certain rules, like the infamous ban on wildflowers, were quietly lifted altogether. It was as if the HOA itself had decided that resistance was futile. Karen, on the other hand, refused to go down without a fight. She still patrolled the streets, clipboard in hand, searching for any excuse to flex her diminishing power. But her presence no longer carried the same weight it once did. Neighbors greeted her forced smiles with polite indifference, and when she tried to lecture someone about their non-compliant mailbox, they simply laughed it off. Her threats of fines and violations felt hollow now, like empty words echoing into the void. One day, I noticed something unusual: Karen's front yard. For years, it had been the poster child of HOA perfection: a perfectly manicured lawn, symmetrical flower beds, and a shiny brass address plaque polished to a mirror-like shine. But lately, cracks were beginning to show. Literally. The grass looked patchy, as if she'd stopped watering it altogether, and one of her prized rose bushes had wilted beyond saving. Even her American flag hung limply from its pole, faded and frayed at the edges. Rumors swirled about what might have caused this sudden decline. Some said she'd lost interest after her failed attempt to turn the neighborhood against us. Others speculated that she was simply too busy plotting her next move. Whatever the reason, it was clear that Karen's obsession with control was taking its toll, not just on the rest of us, but on herself. Meanwhile, the rest of Willow Creek continued to flourish. The mural on the community shed inspired residents to get creative with their own spaces. Wind chimes tinkled softly in the breeze, painted rocks lined sidewalks like hidden treasures, and gardens overflowed with colors and textures that defied any rulebook. People started spending more time outside, chatting over fences or helping each other with projects. What had once felt like a sterile subdivision was slowly becoming a vibrant tapestry of individuality and connection. Even Greg and Linda Monroe surprised everyone by tearing down their overly formal hedge and replacing it with a cheerful picket fence adorned with climbing ivy. When I complimented them on the change, Greg shrugged sheepishly. "We figured it was time to try something different," he admitted. "Besides, it's kind of nice not having to worry about every little thing." The turning point came during the annual block party, a tradition that had always felt more like a mandatory photo op than an actual celebration. This year, though, things were different. Instead of plastic tablecloths and store-bought cupcakes, neighbors brought homemade dishes and handmade decorations. Someone set up a karaoke machine, and soon enough, even the most reserved residents were belting out tunes under strings of twinkling fairy lights. Karen showed up late, dressed in her usual stiff business casual attire, looking utterly out of place amidst the laughter and music. She lingered near the snack table, nibbling awkwardly on a cookie while avoiding eye contact with anyone who approached her. Eventually, she slipped away unnoticed, leaving behind only the faint scent of lavender perfume. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the neighborhood in a warm golden glow, I stood back and took it all in. Kids chased fireflies, couples danced barefoot on the grass, and wind chimes sang softly in harmony with the night breeze. Willow Creek wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was alive in a way it hadn't been before. And for the first time, it felt like we belonged here. That night, as I sat on my porch surrounded by my beloved wildflowers, I realized something important. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it certainly doesn't come without resistance. But when people come together, united by a shared vision of freedom and community, even the smallest acts of defiance can grow into something extraordinary. Karen may have driven straight into the lake that day, but in doing so, she unintentionally helped us find our footing and reclaim our neighborhood. Months later, as I stood on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I couldn't help but reflect on how much Willow Creek had transformed. What started as a quiet rebellion against Karen's iron-fisted rules had grown into something far greater, a movement that brought us closer together as neighbors and reminded us what it truly meant to be a community. The wildflowers I'd planted along my fence line were thriving, their vibrant colors spilling over into the edges of my yard, like a cheerful rebellion frozen in time. They weren't just flowers anymore. They were symbols of resilience, individuality, and unity. Across the street, Alina's treehouse twinkled with fairy lights, while Tom's scarecrow wore a jaunty new hat someone had knitted for it. Even Mrs. Thompson's rose garden now featured a whimsical bird feeder shaped like a teapot, a gift from her grandchildren, who said it matched her personality perfectly. Karen, predictably, had retreated further into obscurity. She still lived in her house at the end of the cul-de-sac, but she rarely ventured outside these days. Her once pristine lawn had become an overgrown mess, and the shiny SUV she'd driven into the lake sat idle in her driveway, its bumper sticker faded from sun exposure. Occasionally, I'd catch glimpses of her peeking through the curtains, watching as kids played near the mural-covered shed or couples strolled hand-in-hand down the street. It was hard not to feel a pang of sympathy. For all her bluster and bravado, Karen seemed lonelier than ever. But life moves forward, even for those left behind. The HOA meetings became less frequent and more casual, almost resembling friendly gatherings rather than rigid assemblies. Margaret Hensley resigned shortly after the block party, citing personal reasons, though everyone knew it was because she couldn't keep up with the changing tides. In her place, a committee of volunteers took over, including Mrs. Thompson, who proved surprisingly adept at balancing structure with flexibility. Fines were replaced with gentle reminders, and disputes were resolved with open conversations instead of threats. One evening, as I watered my wildflowers, Greg stopped by with a six-pack of soda and a sheepish grin. "Thought you might want one of these," he said, holding out a can. "Call it an olive branch." I accepted it with a smile, surprised but grateful. "Does this mean you're officially on board with the chaos?" He chuckled, glancing around at the colorful additions dotting our yards. "Let's just say I've realized perfection isn't all it's cracked up to be. Besides," he added with a wink, "I kind of like the sound of those wind chimes." As we chatted, I noticed Karen stepping cautiously onto her porch, clutching a tray of cookies. For a moment, I thought she might retreat back inside when she saw us talking. But instead, she hesitated, then slowly made her way toward us. "I, baked these," she mumbled, holding out the tray awkwardly. "Figured maybe, peace offering." It wasn't a heartfelt apology, but it was progress, and honestly, it was enough. We exchanged polite thank yous, and though the conversation remained stilted, there was an unspoken understanding that things could never go back to the way they were. Karen didn't apologize for her actions, nor did we expect her to. But her gesture, however small, signaled a willingness to coexist, even if it came begrudgingly. That night, as I settled into my favorite chair by the window, I thought about everything we'd been through. From Karen's dramatic plunge into the lake to the neighborhood's collective decision to embrace imperfection, it had been a journey filled with laughter, frustration, and ultimately, triumph. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was ours, and that made all the difference. Outside, the wind chimes sang softly in the breeze, a melody that felt like home.